Chapter 1, They were already here. The storm above XO9 didn't behave like a normal one. It twisted and churned in jagged motions, as if something unseen guided it. Lightning crackled in colors that didn't belong in the known spectrum, burning afterimages into Darius Vex's vision. The Concorde's landing craft trembled as it broke through the thick atmosphere, its reinforced hull groaning under the planet's crushing gravity. A Class 15 Deathworld. The highest recorded danger rating in the Galactic Concorde's database. Uninhabitable. A place where even automated drones failed to last more than a few hours before being torn apart by the environment or the things that lived in it. And yet, the impossible had happened. Human life signs. Darius Vex, special operative of the Concorde's recon unit, narrowed his eyes as the ship's scanners displayed an anomaly. A structure, no, an entire fortress, rose from the jagged obsidian landscape ahead. "That's preposterous," muttered Lieutenant Oren, the ship's intelligence officer. "Human structures? Here? This world should have killed them generations ago." Darius ignored him, gripping the edge of his seat as the ship hovered over the strange settlement. From above, the structure looked organic, metallic walls shaped like the ribcage of some massive, long-dead beast. The material wasn't steel, nor any alloy in the Concorde's archives. The ship's comm crackled. "Commander Vex, we're receiving an incoming transmission." "From whom?" Silence. Then a response. "From inside the fortress." Darius exchanged glances with his second-in-command, Captain Reese. She looked just as baffled. The transmission came through, heavy with static. A voice, deep, steady, and utterly human. "You shouldn't have come." The words sent a chill through Darius. No threat. No warning. Just a fact. "Open the doors," he ordered. The landing ramp extended, releasing a hiss of pressurized air. The moment he stepped outside, the gravity nearly crushed him. His armor's servos groaned, adjusting to the brutal atmospheric density. XO9 was alive in a way no world should be. The air moved like liquid, thick and humid, carrying the scent of something both burnt and raw. The ground pulsated, as if the rock itself was breathing. They weren't alone. Figures emerged from the fortress gate, walking in formation. Not stumbling. Not struggling under the weight of the world. Walking, as if they owned this place. Humans. Darius counted 7 of them, clad in some kind of armor that looked grown rather than forged. A deep red glow pulsed from the veins running along their suits. Then his gaze landed on the man leading them. Tall. Lean. A presence like a storm barely contained. His face was lined with age and experience, but his eyes, they burned with something beyond human. He stopped a few feet away from Darius, studying him as if he were a relic of the past. "You're Concorde," the man finally said. His voice carried no surprise. Only certainty. "And you are?" Darius asked, keeping his stance firm. A small smirk tugged at the man's lips. "Captain Elias Kane. Formerly of the UEN colony ship Arcadia." "Arcadia?" That was impossible. The Arcadia went missing over 200 years ago. "That ship was lost," Darius said carefully. Kane's gaze didn't waver. "Not lost. Abandoned." Darius didn't let the shock show on his face, but his mind raced. This was beyond improbable. It was insane. The Arcadia was one of the early Earth colony ships, meant to establish human settlements on habitable exoplanets. No distress signals were ever received. No wreckage was ever found. Yet here Kane stood, alive, along with his people, on a world that should have chewed them up and spat them out. Darius gestured to the impossible fortress behind them. "You built this?" Kane exhaled sharply, almost a laugh. "No," he said. "We grew it." Darius felt Captain Reese tense beside him. "That's not possible." Kane's expression didn't change. "By Concorde standards?" "No. But this planet, it doesn't play by your rules." Darius had seen a lot of things in his years serving the Concorde. But never this. Kane turned slightly, gesturing toward the towering walls. Do you know why this planet was labeled a Class 15 Deathworld? Extreme gravitational pressure. Unstable climate. Hyperpredators. Toxic biosphere. Darius listed the known data. Kane nodded. That's what your scanners tell you. But that's not the real reason. Darius frowned. Then what is? Kane's smirk faded. His next words were not a warning, but a statement of truth. Because the last species that tried to conquer this planet is buried beneath our feet. A ripple of unease went through the Concorde team. Even the wind seemed to still. Darius kept his expression neutral. And what happened to them? Kane's gaze met his. They lost. Something moved in the distance. A low, metallic hum. Darius turned his head slightly, activating his visor's scanners. The terrain, once still, had shifted. Something beneath the surface had begun to wake up. Kane exhaled, rolling his shoulders. And now that you're here, I suppose it was only a matter of time before they noticed you, too. The air thickened. The sky darkened, storm clouds twisting unnaturally. Darius tightened his grip on his rifle. Who's they? Kane didn't answer immediately. He looked to the sky. Then, finally, he spoke. The old ones. Lightning crashed, illuminating the ruined horizon. The ground trembled beneath them, a vibration too precise, too structured, to be natural. Darius knew what that meant. Machines. War constructs. Something massive, buried beneath the surface, stirring after centuries of silence. Reese stepped closer. Commander, we should. A deep, metallic voice boomed through the air, vibrating in their bones. Unacceptable variants detected. Purge protocols initiated. The old ones had awakened. Kane sighed, rolling his shoulders. And here we go again. Darius turned to his team. Weapons ready. We move, now. The hunt had begun. Chapter 2, The Old Ones Stir. The first tremor came as a deep, distant rumble, like a heartbeat awakening beneath the surface. Darius Vex barely had time to react before the second tremor followed, shaking the ground with precision that felt more engineered than natural. His visor's sensors screamed warnings, massive energy spikes, seismic activity accelerating at impossible rates. Captain Elias Kane remained still, his expression unreadable. His people, those evolved humans, impossibly adapted to this world, watched without fear. Darius knew better. They weren't fearless. They were ready. A voice, smooth and mechanical, echoed across the wasteland. Purge protocols initiated. Darius swung his rifle up. The darkness on the horizon shifted. The obsidian earth cracked open, releasing spires of gleaming black metal. They surged upwards like fangs piercing the sky, unfolding into jagged, symmetrical formations. From their depths, something stirred. Then, movement. Legs, long, insect-like, emerged from the fissures. Metallic bodies, sleek and armored, rose from the abyss. Their forms pulsed with an eerie blue light, and their movements were disturbingly smooth, precise. The old ones had awakened. Darius didn't hesitate. All units, defensive formation. Now. The Concorde team scrambled, forming a semicircle with weapons aimed forward. Kane, however, simply rolled his shoulders. Don't bother, he said. Darius turned sharply. Explain. Now. Kane tilted his head slightly. They're not here for a fight. The machines didn't charge. They moved with eerie purpose, circling the area in rigid, calculated steps. Scanning. Observing. Their glowing eyes fixed on the humans, calculating, assessing. Then, a new voice emerged, deeper, colder. Variants confirmed. Humanity has deviated from acceptable parameters. Darius clenched his jaw. Acceptable parameters? Kane exhaled through his nose, almost amused. They don't like what we've become. Darius kept his rifle steady. Then why aren't they attacking? Kane's expression darkened. Because they're waiting for an answer. Darius frowned. An answer to what? Kane finally turned to him, his eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. To whether we're still human. Silence stretched between them. Darius tried to process what he was hearing, but the implications were too vast, too unsettling. The old ones weren't just ancient war machines. They were executioners. Enforcers of some long-dead empire's code. A machine stepped forward, its towering frame casting a long shadow. Its voice, calm yet filled with finality, carried through the air. Humanity is a designation. Deviation is unacceptable. Clarify, do you identify as human? Darius stared at Kane, waiting. Kane did not answer immediately. His gaze lifted to the towering construct, his expression unreadable. Then, after a long pause, he spoke. No. The machine's glowing core pulsed. Purge order confirmed. The air itself seemed to crack under the weight of the command. And then the machines charged. The battle begins. Darius barely had time to react before the first projectile streaked toward them, a pulse of searing blue energy, moving at impossible speed. He dove to the side, rolling behind a jagged rock as the blast tore a crater into the ground where he had stood. The Concord troops returned fire. Plasma rounds lit the battlefield, striking the metal monstrosities, but the machines barely flinched. Their armor absorbed the heat, dissipating it in rippling waves. Concord weapons won't work on them, Kane called out. His people moved in perfect synchronization, shifting into a formation that Darius didn't recognize. Then he saw why they had survived here. Kane didn't fire a gun. He moved. With inhuman speed, he closed the distance to the nearest machine, dodging incoming fire with effortless precision. His armor, or whatever it was, shifted along his body, forming razor-sharp claws. Then he ripped through the war construct like it was nothing more than paper. Darius's breath caught. This wasn't training. This was an augmentation. This was something else. The other survivors followed suit, moving faster than physics should allow. One leaped 20 feet into the air, landing atop a machine and driving a blade through its core. Another tore an arm off one of the constructs, using it as a weapon against the next. Darius's mind screamed at the impossibility of it. They weren't just surviving on XO9. They had become part of it. The turning point. Commander. Reese's voice snapped Darius out of his trance. She was pinned down, her cover melting under a sustained energy blast. Darius acted on instinct. He raised his rifle, aimed for the machine's exposed sensor, and fired. The impact sent a small ripple through its frame, enough to make it stumble. Kane was there in an instant. He placed a hand on the machine's chest, and something happened. The war construct froze. Its blue lights flickered, then dimmed. A second later, its entire frame collapsed into dust. Darius turned, stunned. What did you just do? Kane's fingers flexed, remnants of energy still crackling around his hand. He exhaled sharply. We aren't just fighting them, he said. We're overriding them. Darius's blood ran cold. He had fought alongside enhanced soldiers before. Cybernetics. Genetic augmentations. But this? This was something else entirely. And the worst part? It was working. Retreat of the machines. The old ones hesitated. Their movements became erratic, calculating new data. They had encountered humans before, but not this kind. Then, just as suddenly as they had attacked, they stopped. The remaining constructs withdrew, sinking back into the ground. The battlefield fell into silence. Darius's heart pounded as he tried to process what he had just witnessed. Kane exhaled, watching the retreating machines with a grim expression. They'll be back, he said. Stronger. Smarter. Darius turned to him, forcing himself to ask the question that had been gnawing at his mind since the moment they landed. What the hell are you? Kane didn't answer right away. His gaze lingered on the war-torn landscape, on the fading glow of his people's armor, on the sky that had never belonged to anyone but them. Then, at last, he looked Darius in the eye. The next step. Darius felt an unease settle deep in his gut. Kane wasn't boasting. He wasn't threatening. He was telling the truth. And for the first time in his life, Darius wasn't sure if that was a good thing. Chapter 3, We Are the Storm. The silence after the battle felt heavier than the war itself. Darius Vex stared at the battlefield, trying to process what had just unfolded. The old ones, those ancient machines built to cleanse deviations, had retreated. Not because of overwhelming firepower, not because of strategy, but because they had encountered something they didn't understand. Kane and his people weren't just human anymore. They were something new. Darius clenched his jaw, keeping his rifle steady. The wind howled through the obsidian wasteland, carrying the metallic scent of scorched machine husks. Reese approached, her armor scorched but intact. "They're coming back," she said quietly. Darius nodded. Of course, they were. Machines didn't retreat unless they were recalculating. When they returned, they would be stronger, more efficient, deadlier. Kane exhaled slowly, watching the storm gathering on the horizon. His stance was relaxed, but Darius could see the tension in his shoulders. "They'll adapt," Darius said. "They'll find a way to counter whatever you just did." Kane glanced at him, a small smirk forming. "And so will we." That wasn't a boast. It was certainty. Darius shifted his weight. His training told him to report this, to call for reinforcements, to alert the Concord of what had happened here. But something deeper, something instinctual, told him that bringing the full force of the Concord to XO9 might not be the smartest move. His earpiece crackled to life. "Commander Vex, we have incoming." Darius snapped his head up. The sky had changed. The storm was no longer just a storm. The clouds folded inward, twisting like a living thing, pulsing with an unnatural rhythm. The static in the air grew unbearable. Then, through the thick haze, they saw them. The old ones had returned. But this time, they weren't just sending their foot soldiers. The machines descending from the storm were different. Larger. Sleeker. Their forms shimmered as if phasing between dimensions. Their limbs had shifted, adapting to the combat data from their previous defeat. They no longer moved with rigid precision, they moved fluidly, unervingly organic in their motions. They had learned. And now, they were ready. Darius felt the weight of the moment settle in his chest. This wasn't just another skirmish. This was extermination. Kane exhaled sharply. "You want to see what we really are, Commander?" Darius didn't answer. He just gripped his weapon. Then the machines attacked. The last stand. The first blast ripped through the air, tearing into the landscape with a force that sent jagged rock flying in all directions. Darius barely ducked in time before a wave of concussive energy smashed into his cover, sending him sprawling. Kane and his people were already moving. One of the evolved warriors, a woman with unnatural speed, leaped high into the air, twisting mid-flight. Her armor shifted as she extended her arm, a spear of bone and metal forming from her own body. She threw it. The spear pierced straight through one of the machines, its core imploding in a violent cascade of blue fire. Darius swore under his breath. This wasn't just survival. This was dominance. The Concord troops opened fire, but their weapons barely slowed the attackers. The old ones had adapted to standard plasma rounds, shifting their armor into something that absorbed the energy. Darius knew the moment was coming, the moment where their firepower would become irrelevant. But Kane? He wasn't worried. He moved through the chaos like he had lived in it forever. The next machine lunged toward him, its blade-like appendages unfolding. Kane didn't dodge. He let the machine get close, too close, then his hand shot forward. His fingers sank into the construct's chest like it was made of soft clay. The glow in the machine's core flickered. Kane whispered something under his breath. The machine collapsed into dust. Darius stared, mind racing. They weren't just stronger. They were integrating with the machines. Reese cursed. What the hell are they? Darius had no answer. But the battle wasn't over. The turning point. More machines descended from the storm, shifting their tactics, altering their forms. They weren't just fighting humans anymore. They were fighting something beyond human. Then, for the first time, the machines hesitated. The old ones had existed for millennia. Their purpose was simple: eliminate deviations. Maintain the purity of designated species. But XO9 had done something they had not anticipated. It had created a species that was no longer within their parameters. Kane turned, his glowing eyes locking onto the nearest construct. His voice was calm. You know it, don't you? The machine stopped. Darius felt the shift in the air. A moment of pure uncertainty. Kane stepped forward. You don't know how to classify us anymore. The machine's voice crackled, struggling, fragmented. Humanity. Deviated. Unknown designation. Darius gripped his rifle, waiting for the inevitable next command. But it didn't come. The machines didn't attack. Instead, they withdrew. The storm above fractured, breaking apart as the war constructs fled into the atmosphere. The old ones, for the first time in their existence, chose to retreat. Darius felt his heartbeat slow. His training told him to chase them, to track their movements, to prepare for the next fight. But deep inside, he knew. They weren't coming back. Because the war was already over. What comes next? The wind howled, carrying away the remnants of battle. Kane stood at the center of it all, his people behind him, watching Darius carefully. The moment stretched between them, an unspoken understanding. Darius had spent his life believing in the strength of the Concord, in the supremacy of human resilience. But Kane's people weren't human anymore. They were something new. Darius exhaled slowly, lowering his weapon. They'll send more, he said. The Concord won't ignore this. Kane nodded. We know. Darius studied him, searching for any hint of hesitation. There was none. Kane wasn't afraid. Because he knew the truth. The old ones weren't the real enemy. The real enemy would be the ones who couldn't accept what they had become. Darius wasn't sure where he stood anymore. All he knew was that the galaxy had changed. And this time, humanity wasn't just adapting. They were evolving. Darius Vex stood in the heart of the Concord's war headquarters, the cold blue lights of the holographic display casting eerie shadows on his face. The XO9 footage played on loop, showing the impossible. Kane and his people, not just surviving, but dominating. Across the room, Admiral Kever leaned forward, his expression unreadable. The other high-ranking officers sat in grim silence. What exactly are we looking at, Commander? Kever's voice was calm, but there was an edge to it. Darius kept his stance firm. Humanity evolved beyond its limits. Silence. Kever exhaled sharply. That's not evolution. That's something unnatural. Darius clenched his fists. He had expected this reaction. The Concord prided itself on order, on keeping control over humanity's progress. XO9 had shattered that control. They are still human, Darius said. They bled. They fought. They protected their own. Kever tapped the console, zooming in on Kane's face. His glowing eyes flickered on the display. Humans don't glow, Kever said coldly. Darius remained silent. This cannot be allowed, Kever continued. You know what happens when a species outgrows its chains. We've seen it before. Darius felt a chill creep down his spine. He knew what the Concord did to civilizations that became uncontrollable. Complete extermination. The Admiral leaned back. We cannot let them spread. XO9 must be purged. Darius's heart pounded. That would be genocide. Kever's gaze locked onto him. That would be order. The decision was made. A fleet was already mobilizing. XO9 would be wiped from existence. And Darius had a choice to make. Chapter 5, Concorde's Attack. The sky above XO9 burned. The Concorde Armada arrived in full force, battleships, dreadnoughts, and thousands of ground forces. This was not a raid. This was an annihilation force. Darius stood inside the Concorde's command ship, his fists clenched. The officers around him issued orders with mechanical precision. Shock troopers are in position. Orbital strike coordinates locked. Total planetary purge in T-minus 30 minutes. Darius felt suffocated. This wasn't war. This was a massacre. A comm officer turned to him. Commander Vex, orders from High Command. You're to lead the first strike. Darius froze. What? You know the terrain. You know their defenses. High Command expects you to assist in the operation. Assist? They were asking him to lead the slaughter. He turned his gaze to the planet below. He saw Kane's people moving, already preparing for the fight. They weren't running. They were standing their ground. His decision was made. Without hesitation, Darius grabbed the comm unit and cut into the fleet-wide channel. This is Commander Vex. He took a breath. I am defecting. Gasps filled the command deck. Then he grabbed his rifle, shot out the main console, and ran. The war had begun. Chapter 6, The War Begins. The first blast tore through the sky like a crack of thunder. Darius's stolen fighter screeched through the atmosphere, alarms blaring as he pushed it past safety limits. Behind him, the Concorde warships opened fire, raining hell upon XO9. The evolved humans didn't flinch. Kane stood atop the fortress, his eyes glowing as he raised his hands. The planet itself responded. Massive spires of biomechanical armor erupted from the ground, forming shields against the bombardment. Darius landed hard, running toward Kane. They're not stopping, he shouted. They'll burn this planet down before they let you exist. Kane didn't blink. Then we'll teach them why we exist. The first wave of Concorde soldiers landed. Darius watched in horror and awe as Kane's warriors rushed forward. They didn't use guns. They didn't need to. They moved faster than the eye could follow, tearing through the Concorde's elite soldiers like they were made of glass. One of Kane's warriors, a woman with metallic veins pulsing beneath her skin, touched a Concorde walker. It froze mid-motion. Then it collapsed into dust. Darius swore under his breath. This wasn't just evolution. This was something beyond human. The Concorde had come to wipe them out. Instead, they were being torn apart. Chapter 7, The Choice. The battle raged, but the Concorde refused to retreat. The flagship descended, its superweapon primed to erase XO9 from existence. Darius turned to Kane. If they fire that thing, it's over. Kane closed his eyes. Then he placed his hand on Darius's chest. Darius gasped. A surge of energy flooded his body. He could feel the battlefield. The pulse of every life. The movement of the Concorde soldiers. The heartbeat of the planet itself. He saw the universe differently. Kane's voice echoed in his mind. Now you understand. Darius staggered back, breathing heavily. He wasn't just seeing anymore. He was connected. Above, the superweapon fired. Kane lifted a hand. And stopped it. The energy blast froze mid-air, bending around them. The flagship shuddered, its systems failing. Darius's mind reeled. We're not just adapting. Kane nodded. No. We're becoming something new. Chapter 8, The Dawn of a New Humanity. The Concorde was gone. Not destroyed, assimilated. The war had lasted mere hours. The strongest fleet in the galaxy had been undone, not by weapons, but by a force they had never considered. Kane stood at the highest peak of XO9, watching the sky clear. His people were no longer bound by gravity, by flesh, by the limits imposed on them. Darius felt the change in himself. He was no longer Concord. He was something more. Reese stared at him, her voice shaky. What have we become? Darius looked at his hands, at the energy coursing through them. Then he looked at Kane, who simply smirked. Something unstoppable. They turned to the stars, watching the remnants of the Concord's former empire receive the message of their defeat. Humanity was no longer bound by its past. It was evolving into something else. And nothing could stop them now.